pine will have a number of needles, which you'll all be aware of. In between each of those needles is where a new candle can grow from. This candle will grow out and form, as it opens out, a row of needles all the way down it, which will again allow a new candle to grow from, and so on and so forth. Various pines have different numbers of these candles from a bud. So a Japanese black pine traditionally will have 5, but white pines can have more, and red pines are another form as well. None of that actually really matters. What matters is that you get the concept that if you were to cut a pine tree down and remove all of its needles, you would effectively kill the tree. You wouldn't get new growth again. So you need to have that greenery, you need to have those needles in order for those new candles to be born. Now, when those candles appear, around now, I will show you, they're starting to appear. In the next few months, they will grow, and in Japan, what they will do is they will, in particular an established tree, is they will pine prune, or cut the candles. There's lots of different phrases for it. What they do in Japan is just before those needles open, they will use their fingers and they will pinch those candles out completely back to the base. And what that does is it forces the tree to create a second flush of growth and bud back along the branch, and that is how you get those shorter candles being created. They obviously don't have as long a growing season, and you also have a more dense number of candles growing off a single branch, which helps to get those dense pads which the Japanese revere so much. So that's ultimately the aim. In the November time in Japan, it's sometimes earlier, maybe October, the autumn time, they then carry out a process called nomiagi, which is where they go through and all that new growth, they then thin it out, and they go back and they also pull off a lot of the needles, so that when they force the bud back in the following year, they don't get buds where they don't want them, basically. And it's this autumnal formative pruning which is the most important bit when trying to create the shape. But let me just go into a couple of examples that I've got here to show you some various kind of tactics almost as to how to start when you're a new beginner. The first thing is, grow your trees from seeds or buy them from a nursery, either or. Let them grow until ideally they're a good kind of foot tall, maybe 2 feet tall, and they can grow perfectly straight. That's not a problem at all, because it's the next point which is where you start to create some shape. So the most simple thing to do is to try and create a more interesting trunk, and so you would repot it is one option on an angle. So I have an example here. This is one that I grew perfectly straight, and then I repotted this 2 years ago, and put the pot in at a diagonal angle and supported it with a stake in order to get something that grows, as you can see, at kind of 45 degrees, and that's going to be the start of one of the trees. Another option you have is the leading candle, the trunk. You can prune completely, and you can allow the trunk to then kink and go at a different angle. So rather than repotting the whole tree sideways, what you could do is you could cut it and let the leader and the trunk suddenly go off in a different direction. There is an example of that just down here, where I've taken the top off and allowed the trunk to travel in a different direction. Thirdly, you can wire a tree, and I'll give you a close-up of some of these in a minute, but you can follow a support or a stake in order to bend the tree in a certain direction. Here is an example of that tree in a bit more detail that I grew perfectly straight and then planted at a 45-degree angle. Behind it you can see the example of where I've removed the leader at that point, and I've let the 3 side branches grow on, and I'm going to recreate it with this being the trunk in order to create something a little bit more interesting. Finally, another way of doing this is to stake the trees. The best example here is where I've used a metal support and I've trained the leader each year to follow the support. We have further to go. Here is a close-up of the candles that are beginning to form. It's currently early March here, and as such, within a few months, these candles would have grown, in this tree's case, maybe 3 or 4 inches. If you want to see the true height that a candle can grow, if you come to this more established tree, you'll see that this is that same point I've just shown you on this tree with the candles from last year. That leading candle grew in just 1 year by that amount, nearly 2 feet in a single year. Once you've got that trunk traveling in the direction that you wish, it's then about working out where you want those branches to go. And in my case, particularly in the formative years, what I aim to do is to bend them using wire, or the other way of doing it is, as they get a bit more established, tie them down using a string. But it's important that every single year you go back and you prune and you prune and you prune, because every year that you miss out of pruning, what you will find is you will find it will get leggy, because obviously all those candles will grow, in the case of the larger tree up there, maybe 10 inches. And once you've let it grow and once you've let it established, if you cut it all the way back again but there are no needles in this area, then obviously that whole branch will die. And so it's important that you keep on top of it to keep the branches only growing very shortly in order to create those pads over time. Although I don't know if I want to keep all of these branches, here you can see where I've used wire, always wiring 2 branches at once in order for one to support the other, in order to create that aging and horizontal effect. Notice how where I pulled in the autumn in the Nomagi process the needles from the tree, you will no longer get any growth at this point. Were I to cut this branch at this point here, that branch would die, you would get no regrowth. It's important to remember how that process exists. These trees can cost upwards of £1,000, upwards of £10,000 at 20 to 30 years old, having been pruned twice a year for that 20 to 30 years. That pruning, from a formative level, can take no more than 15 minutes in the spring and no more than 15 minutes in the autumn. Obviously, once the tree's far more established, it takes longer. However, it does not take an awful lot of gardening, right, to create these trees. It takes vision, it takes consistency, and it takes a little bit of confidence in knowing what you're doing. But once you get through these points, you will be able to create a wonderful niwaki for your Japanese garden. Maybe you've just got a balcony. These trees will take 7 to 10 years to get to a stage whereby, you know, they may need potting in the ground. But the reality is they can stay in a pot, as you've seen with bonsai, for most of their life. So there's no harm in starting from seed now, getting the seeds to germinate, or buying a small plant and starting this process. Twice a year, every year, and very quickly you will have something that becomes very impressive and very valuable. Let me know how you get on. I hope this video has helped. That's it.